You weren't a delivery worker, not really. That's just what they thought when they saw you carrying boxes down the corridor, your name tag half crooked, your sneakers squeaking softly against polished government floors. A nobody. A helper. Just another face weaving in and out of important rooms where titles and medals carried the only weight people bothered to measure. That's what the interns whispered, smirking over coffee as you passed. But they didn't know. They didn't know that one day, one motion of a general's hand would silence their laughter forever. And when that moment came, it began with 4 words no one in that hall was prepared to hear. Cinder Pike, step in. If you agree that real respect isn't loud, but lived in silence until it's revealed, like and subscribe, because this story will remind you why some truths can't stay hidden. The story begins in an unremarkable hallway, late morning, when the air smelled faintly of fresh polish and stale ambition. Down the line of closed oak doors, muffled voices bled through. A committee briefing, a budget argument, a general's gravel-deep commands reverberating against plaster walls. Civilian contractors shuffled with clipboards, interns clutched folders they didn't understand, and in the middle of it all, moving quietly with a tray of boxed lunches, was a young woman no one thought twice about. 28 years old, Cinder Pike looked like any other temp. Hair tied back in a loose knot, black polo tucked into khakis, her ID badge swinging with each step. She never hurried, never lingered. She walked steady, as though her life depended on rhythm. Few noticed it, but 1 or 2 caught themselves pausing, wondering why she carried herself like someone who had learned to measure each pace in hostile sand, not sterile linoleum. But to most, she was invisible. An aide in a pressed uniform muttered, "Watch the corners, delivery girl," as if she hadn't already slid past without spilling a single drink in 3 years of contracts. Another whispered with a grin, "Bet she can't even get through the double doors without bumping her cart." They chuckled, satisfied with their little joke, the kind you make when you're certain the target won't answer back. And Cinder didn't. She never did. She let the words roll off, her eyes fixed straight ahead. It wasn't patience. It wasn't submission. It was a choice, because silence, to her, was a language sharper than mockery. She reached the end of the corridor where double doors loomed, brushed steel handles gleaming under fluorescent lights. Behind them, she knew, sat men and women with stars stitched to their shoulders, ribbons layered across their chests, papers spread out that would decide things far beyond the walls of this building. It wasn't her place to enter. She was only supposed to set the tray on the table outside, knock once, and vanish back into the hall. That's what she'd done 100 times before. That's what everyone expected of her now. And yet, as she placed the lunches carefully on the side table, the door cracked open. A staffer poked his head out, looked annoyed to see her still there. He waved his hand dismissively. "Just leave them. We'll manage." His tone was clipped, as though her very presence was an interruption in the rhythm of importance. She nodded once, no words wasted, and turned slightly to leave. But in the silence that followed, another voice, deeper, commanding, and heavy with recognition, cut through. "Cinder Pike," it said. Not a question, not an uncertain glance at a name tag. A statement. Precise. Heavy. The air shifted instantly. The staffer blinked, frozen, his posture stiff. He turned halfway back into the room. "Sir?" he asked, uncertainty seeping into his voice. Inside, the sound of chairs scraped against hardwood. Papers stilled. The room that had been humming with layered voices just seconds earlier was now hushed, hanging on the weight of a name most of them had never heard. Then came the words again, sharper this time, deliberate. "Cinder Pike. Step in." Her hand paused on the cart. Her spine straightened almost reflexively, as though a hidden switch had been flipped. For a long heartbeat, she said nothing, did nothing. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Behind her, 2 young aides stared openly, whispering, "Wait, he knows her?" The staffer at the door hesitated, then stepped aside slowly, his eyes darting between her and the commanding figure within. Cinder Pike didn't rush. She didn't shrink back. She simply moved forward, steady as ever, through the doorway, her presence as quiet as it was undeniable. She crossed the threshold into a room where she wasn't supposed to matter. And yet, in that single moment, everyone knew something they hadn't just minutes before. She mattered more than any of them had imagined. And though none of them understood yet why, they were about to learn. The door closed behind her with a soft, deliberate click, sealing her into the chamber where power itself seemed to hum in the air. The walls were lined with heavy mats, classified reports stacked in neat piles, a projector humming faintly in the corner. Men and women in full dress uniforms, silver and gold glinting from their shoulders, turned toward the interruption. Their faces were tight with confusion, some even irritation. What business could a lunch delivery worker possibly have in this space? Cinder Pike didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She stood just inside the threshold, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breath calm and measured. Not timid, not arrogant, just steady. The general sat at the head of the long oak table, papers spread before him. His nameplate glistened, General Marcus Halverson, 4 stars, Combat Command. He was a man known for precision, for never wasting time or words. And yet, here he was, interrupting a classified briefing for her. "Pike," he said again, his voice carrying the weight of command but tinged with something deeper. Recognition. Memory. Step closer. A murmur rippled through the room. A colonel on Halverson's left frowned. "Sir, with respect, who is she?" Halverson didn't answer. He didn't look away from Cinder. His gaze was locked, unwavering, as if confirming something only he could see. Cinder walked forward, each footfall quiet but resonant. She stopped at the far end of the table, the boxed lunches forgotten on their tray outside the door. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension pressed heavy, and yet she stood as though she'd been here 1,000 times before. Finally, Halverson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Most of you don't know this woman," he said. His tone was calm, but it cut like steel through the murmurs. "But you should." The colonel's frown deepened. "General, with respect, this is a secure session. We can't just—" Halverson's eyes flashed. "Colonel, you'll remain silent until I finish." The rebuke silenced the room instantly. No one questioned Marcus Halverson twice. Now every eye turned to Cinder Pike, confusion hardening into curiosity, then unease. She didn't move. She didn't explain herself. She let the general's words hang. Halverson nodded once, as if making up his mind. Then he spoke. "She's not a delivery worker. She's not a contractor. This woman once led one of the quietest, most dangerous units we ever put on the field." The silence sharpened. Cheers shifted. A lieutenant near the far wall whispered to another, "That's impossible. She looks barely 30. Cinder's eyes flicked toward him briefly, not with anger, but with the kind of gaze that could pin a man to his seat. He looked away instantly. Halverson continued. "She enlisted at 19. Special Operations Command. Permissions don't show up in the records you've studied because they don't appear on paper. Black files. Directive-level secrecy. What she did, where she went, you'll never read it. Not unless you've got clearance higher than this room grants." The colonel scoffed under his breath, though quieter now. "With respect, sir, you expect us to believe." Halverson cut him off with a single sentence. "I expect you to believe me when I tell you I am alive today because of her." The word struck like a hammer. The general's voice lowered, steady, unwavering. 2019, Southern Helmand Province. You've read the summaries, I know. Convoy ambushed. Radio blackout. Extraction team compromised. Every officer present that day was listed MIA. Except one. Me. Gasps broke the stillness. Everyone in that room knew the Helmand ambush. They had studied it in tactical briefings. They had dissected the failures, the losses, the brutal aftermath. But what the official files never detailed was how Marcus Halverson had survived. Until now. He gestured toward Cinder Pike. "She pulled me out. 19 years old. No backup. No air cover. Just grit, silence, and a knife." Cinder didn't move, didn't react. Her expression remained calm, her hands folded loosely in front of her. She let him tell it. The colonel cleared his throat, but the sound betrayed unease now. "But sir, why is she here? Why now?" Halverson leaned forward, his eyes sweeping the table. "Because too many of you are forgetting what leadership looks like. You think it's medals, ribbons, shouting louder than the next officer. But leadership is this." He nodded toward Cinder. The woman standing silently in this room who risked her life without hesitation, then walked away without asking for recognition. The air grew heavy. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable under the weight of truth. Others leaned forward, caught between disbelief and awe. One young major finally spoke, his voice soft, almost reverent. She's barely older than us. Cinder lifted her head then, her voice cutting clear for the first time. Calm, low, controlled. Age doesn't measure what you carry. It was the only thing she said, and it was enough. The room stilled, absorbing the words. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to argue. Her presence, her steadiness, spoke louder than any protest could. Halverson's gaze moved across the table. You sit here and argue doctrine, protocol, percentages. She lived it. She wrote the lessons you skim through in training manuals. The reason some of you even have the luxury to sit in this room is because she bled for it in silence. The colonel finally pushed back his chair, his pride prickling. General, are we really elevating a civilian into? But his words died when Halverson rose to his feet. Slowly, deliberately, his boots echoed against the polished floor. He came to stand beside Cinder Pike, not above her. Beside her, and then, in a move that made every officer's heart stop, Marcus Halverson saluted her. Not perfunctory, not casual. A crisp, flawless salute offered first. The colonel's face drained of color. The aides by the wall stood straighter. The silence was deafening. Cinder inclined her head slightly, returning the salute with calm precision. Then she lowered her hand and spoke again, her tone quiet but cutting through every corner of the room. I'm not here to take your rank. I don't need your stripes. But never mistake silence for weakness. Some of us learned long ago that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the one that matters. No one moved. No one dared. Halverson broke the silence. That's the lesson. You'll forget faces like hers if you're not careful. You'll mock them in hallways, laugh at them as if they've had their time. And then, one day, you'll realize the person you overlooked is the reason the system you serve still stands. The colonel who had spoken so brashly earlier looked down at his papers, his jaw tight with shame. The young major swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on Cinder as though seeing her for the first time. Even the aides, who had whispered jokes outside, now stood with their backs straight, guilt pressing at the edges of their composure. Halverson turned to Cinder, his voice softer now. I called you in because they needed to see it. Not the reports. Not the numbers. You. Cinder held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. No dramatics. No flourish. Just acknowledgement. She didn't bask in it. She didn't want to. Because she hadn't lived her life for applause. And as the silence stretched, as the weight of truth sank heavy into every officer's chest, they all understood something they hadn't before. The woman who had walked in carrying a tray of forgotten lunches was more than the sum of their assumptions. She was Cinder Pike, and respect, long overdue, was finally in the room. The silence after General Halverson's salute hung in the air like a weight no one dared disturb. A single gesture had shifted the balance of the entire room. The air no longer hummed with dismissal or impatience. Now it pulsed with something heavier, something rare in halls like these, reverence. Cinder Pike stood where she was, steady as ever. She didn't fidget. She didn't break the silence. She didn't need to. Her very presence filled it. Finally, a voice cracked through the stillness. The young major who had spoken earlier, his voice softer now, stripped of arrogance. Commander Pike, he began, but his words trailed off under her calm gaze. She shook her head faintly. Not Commander. Not anymore. Her tone was quiet, almost gentle, yet it carried with a force that made every officer lean in to hear. I don't wear your rank. I don't sit at your table. But don't mistake that for absence. What I carry doesn't fit on my chest. It lives in silence, in the things I don't say. Somewhere near the end of the table, a chair scraped softly as someone straightened, as if standing taller would make the words sting less. Halverson's eyes swept the room. You see, he said, his voice sharper now. You measure leadership in stripes and citations. She measures it in lives saved, in nights endured when no one came to help, in choices made where failure meant death. You read lessons from doctrine. She wrote them in blood. The colonel, the same one who had doubted the most, his pride cutting through every syllable before, shifted uneasily in his chair. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward Cinder, then away again, shame beginning to creep past the iron of his composure. Cinder's gaze moved across the table, not accusing, not demanding, just steady. She let the silence judge them. When she finally spoke again, her words were simple. The loudest in the room are rarely the ones who last. Remember that the next time you laugh at someone who walks quietly. A murmur rippled across the younger officers, those still fresh enough to believe volume equaled power. Their shoulders sank slightly. Their eyes dropped to the polished wood of the table. They knew the truth when they heard it. And then, slowly, something remarkable happened. Halverson rose fully to his feet, his frame tall and unyielding. He turned toward her, and without waiting for permission, saluted again. This time, his hand was crisp, deliberate, unwavering. For a heartbeat, no one else moved. The weight of tradition, of hesitation, of pride still clung to them. But the silence was louder now, pressing, demanding. The young major was the first. His chair scraped back. He stood. His hand rose to his brow in a sharp salute, his eyes locked firmly ahead, as though ashamed to meet hers directly. Then another followed, and another. Soon, the room filled with the sharp rhythm of boots and the synchronized rise of hands. One by one, every officer, every aide, every uniform in the chamber stood at attention, saluting the woman they had dismissed minutes before. It wasn't out of obligation. It wasn't out of fear. It was out of something deeper. Respect, long overdue. Cinder Pike didn't smile. She didn't bask in it. She simply returned the salute once, crisp and controlled, then lowered her hand. Her voice, when it came, was calm and cutting all at once. Respect is not yours to grant. It's yours to recognize. You don't get to decide who earned it. You only get to choose whether you're blind to it. Her words lingered like a verdict, heavier than any gavel, sharper than any reprimand. The colonel who had mocked earlier swallowed hard. He pushed his chair back, rose slowly, and though his face burned with humiliation, his hand rose to his brow. His salute trembled slightly, but it was there. Cinder met his gaze evenly. No malice, no triumph, just the quiet, immovable weight of someone who had been underestimated too many times to waste energy on anger. Halverson stepped forward, his voice lowering, almost solemn now. This is the lesson I wanted you all to see. Not a report, not a debriefing, a living truth. The people you dismiss are often the very ones who carried you here. Don't wait until you're standing in ruins to realize who kept watch while you slept. No one answered. No one dared. Cinder took a step back then, turning toward the door. The salute lingered as she walked, the air thick with a reverence they couldn't put into words. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back. Her pace was steady, as though she carried a weight none of them could see. And yet, somehow, she carried it with grace. When she reached the door, she paused briefly, her hand resting on the cool metal handle. She turned her head slightly, her voice calm, steady, final. You'll forget my face. That's fine. But don't forget the silence. It has more to teach you than your shouting ever will. Then she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The aides who had whispered jokes earlier scrambled to their feet as she passed. Their eyes dropped, their voices silenced. None dared smirk now. They had seen too much. The heavy door closed behind her, but the weight she left in that room didn't fade. The officers remained standing, their salutes slowly lowering, their eyes fixed not on their general, but on the empty doorway where a woman they had dismissed had stood just minutes earlier. Halverson sat down heavily, the creak of his chair echoing through the silence. His eyes scanned the room, hard and unyielding. You will remember this day, he said. And if you don't deserve the rank you wear. Not one officer spoke. Not one dared breathe too loud. Outside, Cinder Pike walked steadily down the corridor, her badge swinging gently with her pace, her face unreadable. To the others who passed, she looked like what they'd always assumed. Just another contractor carrying out her shift. But those who had been in that room knew better now. The whispers followed, quiet, reverent. Not the delivery girl. Cinder Pike. The name carried weight now, not because she demanded it, but because she had lived it. And though she had stepped back into silence, everyone who had seen her that morning would carry a truth they couldn't shake. Real power doesn't announce itself. It walks quietly, and when it's finally recognized, it changes everything.